this one is particularly important. And, before the last one, people were saying, well, they don't really move the dial, maybe a little bit. And then, of course, that one destroyed the dial. Biden would not have bowed out of the race had it not been for his disastrous performance in that debate. So this time around, Kamala Harris, who's known to Democrats, especially those who follow the convention, which I was at a few weeks ago, where she did pretty well, but she's not known to the majority of American voters, partly because also being vice president, you are literally the spare, and you don't get to do much that's very high profile. So people have been defining Kamala Harris, especially the other side, the Republicans, mostly in a negative way, and it is her job tonight to define herself before the American electorate. Trump's job is, and everyone has an opinion on Trump, it's either good or it's bad, it's rarely in between. Trump's job is to win over some of those people, the few people who might still be in the middle, but also to restrain himself and try and prevent the worst of Trump coming out. Because we know that the only person who can really defeat Donald Trump is a guy called Donald Trump.
And he's been doing a fairly good job of that lately. He's got himself into uncharacteristically muddled scenarios, and the appointment of J.D. Vance possibly looking like a fairly epic misstep.
The biggest misstep is what he's been saying himself. Trump was so focused on Sleepy Joe, as he called the president, that when Kamala Harris came along, it didn't quite work. And what he should be doing, and what his advisors have been telling him to do every single day, is to mention three things: the economy, immigration and crime. And then add to that the question, which he might do tonight: were you better off 4 years ago than you are now? That's the question that Ronald Reagan famously asked Jimmy Carter. Well, yes. The answer is no. I mean, and these are not all because of Joe Biden.
Sure.
But, inflation, although the numbers are down, they're certainly better than ours. Americans feel as if the cost of living is strangling them, and in many cases it is. Crime is worse in many cases than it was in many places, and immigration is certainly up. And the rhetoric used by this administration around all these issues has been, frankly, faulty. And of course, Kamala Harris's challenge, James, will be to say, well, on one level, I'm the agent of change. I'm a woman of colour. I'll be the first female president.
But she doesn't play that card. She doesn't do what Clinton did she?
Doesn't need to.
No.
The trouble with Clinton was that she would have been the first female president, but her femininity was overshadowed by the fact that she was a Clinton.
Yes.
There was more baggage there than there was on United Airlines.
She did bang on about it a lot.
She did, because she had to, in a way.
Yes. Okay.
She had to remind people that she was a woman as well as a Clinton.
But as a voter, it might have made me think that this was more about her than it was about me.
Yeah, that's possible. And Kamala Harris has been quite good at aping that Obama language. This is about you and not about me.
Exactly.
So that was very good. I mean, in a way, what she's offering America is a community of inclusion. What Trump is offering America is a fortress of exclusion, right? Now, depending on where you stand on that issue, you go for one or the other.
And yet, here's the thing, Matt, that we discuss, you and me, it's not a criticism of you, we're discussing this as a sort of balanced battle between equal and opposite forces. I think that last picture that you drew is absolutely accurate, the inclusion versus exclusion. But Donald Trump, a multiple convicted felon and adjudicated rapist, his speeches are not peppered with lies. It's as if moments of truth are accidental. And
they're peppered with truth.
They're peppered with truth. And yet the only language that the media has got to describe this clash, these battles, it involves necessarily a form of equivalence, a form of balance. It's like there's one person turning up with a copy of the Queensberry Rules and one person turning up for a knife fight.
I would say it slightly differently.
Yeah.
America's so tribal. It is so either you're with us, or you're against us, that if you talk to Trump people and you point out all those lies, and, there are plenty of people in the mainstream media who do that all the time, the cult around Trump just doesn't listen.
Yeah.
They don't believe you. They think because you're saying it, James O'Brien or Matt Frei, it has to be a lie in itself. And to some extent, to really unravel why America is so messed up, why it's so toxic, why it's so divided, you have to look at the media landscape where, on both sides, people are singing to the choir. The left never questions its own assumptions. The right never questions its own assumptions. There is nothing in the middle. There are no arbitrators that say, well, hang on a minute, here's the fact check, here are the lies, here's the truth. She also has told lies, not as many as Donald Trump. But the problem is this. When you have a country where both sides believe that if the other side wins, it is the end of their version of the republic. It is literally the end of their world, that either America will become a communist dystopia or a fascist dystopia. And if you then don't agree on the rules of the game, which is where we get back to the last election, 2020, you're in big trouble, because then the only solution to winning or losing that game of Monopoly is to kick the board. And when you kick the board, you don't have democracy.
And how big a risk is that? I mean, in the event there's two things. See, this again is where the imbalance becomes untenable. No one is going to fear for the future of American democracy if Kamala Harris wins, unless Donald Trump does something. And people are going to fear for the future of American democracy if Donald Trump wins. So how?
And I think that is an accurate way of putting it. I mean, we used to say before the first election that got Trump elected in 2016, you got to take him seriously, but not literally. It turns out you have to do both.
Take him literally, yes.
Right, and seriously.
Yeah.
And he's got form in terms of overturning democracy, because we know, and it's proven, that he tried to do so in 2020. We know that he had a hand in January the 6th, which was, an insurrectionist act. And we know that the Democrats have not tried to do that. They have not done the same. What makes it more complicated still is that the Supreme Court of the United States, which has a conservative majority, thanks to 3 justices appointed by Trump, he was very lucky in the sense that he got 3 vacancies, has essentially passed a ruling recently where any act, however criminal it might be in a civil court, committed by a president, is not an act of crime that should be judged in a court. So essentially,
that's dystopian.
It's dystopian, but I mean, some of those things will be handed down to lower courts.
Sure.
But when the Supreme Court rules that the president can more or less do whatever he likes as a president,
he cannot commit a crime.
He cannot commit a crime, and motive doesn't come into it. I mean, that is a really scary picture.
It certainly is. You remind me of something I was thinking earlier in the week when you talk about the absolute intractability of the base. That means that interventions from people like Dick Cheney are probably not going to nudge the needle at all.
No. I mean, who would have thought that the Cheney family, who were literally, the bread and butter of right-wing Republicans, the Hawks Hawk. I mean, I covered Dick Cheney's vice presidency. He was an extraordinarily, acerbic, clever, and rather funny man with a very dry sense of humour, who had survived 4 heart attacks, who started working in the Nixon White House when he was 36 years old or something. He was vice president. And by the way, he was the guy who was told to find a vice president by George Bush, a suitable candidate. And after a few weeks of looking, said, I am that candidate. This guy is now the reasonable voice of the Republican Party, which has literally been, distilled down to a handful of people.
That's the bit, even though you explain it so brilliantly, intellectually I grasp it, but emotionally I still don't get it. I still don't understand how somebody like Dick Cheney can be clear about
because something has happened in America. Because something has happened in America, and this is not entirely the fault of Trump or the fault of the Republicans. Something has happened there, that there are so many people in America who feel not just left behind, but feel ignored or condescended against or to by the so-called metropolitan elites.
Yeah.
And there is something in that.
Sure.
And the Democrats haven't found a way of talking to those Republicans, and the Republicans demonize the Democrats who try. So it's
but you can't do it, because you say, why do these people believe things that aren't true? And they say, listen to them saying that you believe things that aren't true. They're so condescending. But it doesn't stop the things being untrue.
It's true.
So
that is true.
It's an Egyptian riddle.
But also they're not trying hard enough anymore. It's basically an echo chamber. And of course, we are not an echo chamber on LBC, because
certainly not.
We talk to each other all the time, don't we?
We certainly do. And
we don't always agree with each other.
Yes, we do. Very occasionally.
That's what you think.